You lean in without thinking about it. Lips meet lips, maybe for half a second, maybe longer. It happens at a doorway before work, at an airport gate, in a car with the engine still running. Nobody rehearses it. Nobody calculates the angle of their head or wonders which side to tilt toward, and yet almost everyone alive today gets that detail right on the first try. It feels like nothing. A reflex. A greeting. A habit so small you'd never think to question it. But somewhere in your brain, right now, as you imagine it, your heart rate is quietly shifting. Your pupils are dilating by a fraction of a millimeter you'll never notice. A cocktail of chemicals, oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, is being prepared for release, the same way it has been prepared in human bodies for longer than language has existed. That 2-second act you barely register is one of the strangest, most heavily negotiated behaviors your species ever invented. Because here's the part that should stop you: kissing is not universal. It is not hardwired into every human culture on Earth the way smiling is, or crying is, or flinching from a loud noise is. Entire societies, for entire stretches of history, never did it, or considered it disgusting when they saw outsiders do it. So if it isn't automatic, if it isn't built into all of us the same way breathing is, then somebody, somewhere, at some point, had to start it. The question is, who? And why would two people, with no instruction manual, no internet, no culture telling them it was normal, ever decide that pressing their mouths together was something worth doing at all? For roughly 300,000 years, Homo sapiens has existed as a species. For most of that time, there is no direct evidence anyone was kissing at all. No cave paintings of it. No burial sites arranged around it. No obvious biological requirement that would explain why natural selection should have bothered producing an urge to touch mouths with another person who is not your child and not your food. Compare that to something like fear of snakes, or the instinct to comfort a crying infant, or the reflex to flinch when something moves suddenly toward your face. Those behaviors show up almost everywhere, in almost every population, across every continent, with no cultural transmission required. A baby raised in total isolation from other humans would probably still flinch at a sudden loud noise. That same baby would almost certainly never spontaneously invent kissing. That single fact should feel strange to you. Something this intimate, this loaded with emotional weight in the world you live in now, might not be written into your biology at all. It might be something ancient humans built, a piece of cultural technology, passed from person to person, generation to generation, the same way fire starting or tool making spread. So the story of the kiss is not really a story about romance. It's a story about how an idea, literally, a physical act performed by one human on another human's face, survived, spread, mutated, and eventually became so common that billions of people today do it without a second thought. How did that happen? Where did it start? And what was it actually for, before it became a symbol of love? So let's ask it directly. Why did ancient humans start kissing each other, and how did a strange, vulnerable, faintly bizarre act of pressing your face against someone else's face become one of the most recognizable gestures on the planet? To answer that, we have to go back further than romance. Further than courtship. We have to go back to the very first reason two human faces would ever touch on purpose, and it wasn't love. It was survival. Long before there was any concept of a first kiss, there was a far more urgent, far less glamorous behavior: mouth-to-mouth feeding. Anthropologists studying pre-agricultural societies, and some hunter-gatherer groups observed well into the modern era, have documented mothers chewing food into a soft paste and passing it directly from their own mouths into the mouths of their infants. No blenders. No mashed jars of pureed vegetables. No teeth for the baby to chew with. Just a mother's mouth doing the work her infant's body couldn't do yet. Picture it plainly. An ancient mother crouches near a fire, working a piece of tough root or half-cooked meat between her own teeth, softening it, breaking it down, and then leaning forward to press her lips against her child's and release the food directly into that small, waiting mouth. This wasn't affection first. It was engineering. It solved a real, physical problem. How do you keep a toothless, helpless infant alive on solid food before modern tools existed to prepare it any other way. Now here's where it gets interesting. That act, lips touching lips, done gently, done often, done as an act of care and closeness, did not stay purely functional forever. The infant brain does not separate this act keeps me alive from this act feels safe. Every time that contact happened, it was paired with warmth, with a full stomach, with the calming presence of a parent. The behavior became emotionally coded before it became romantically coded. Long before anyone was kissing a partner, humans were already wired, through repetition, to associate mouth-to-mouth contact with safety, closeness, and trust. Some researchers argue that this feeding behavior is the actual root of what eventually became romantic kissing, not a separate invention, but the same gesture, repurposed. When adult humans, much later in the story, began kissing each other on the mouth in romantic or sexual contexts, they may have been unconsciously reaching back into the oldest, most trusted script the human brain had for lip-to-lip contact. The one that meant you are safe, you are cared for, you will be fed. Here's a second thread, and it comes from a very different angle, not care, but assessment. Long before ancient humans had language sophisticated enough to ask, "Are you healthy? Are you a good genetic match? Do I actually want to be close to you?" Their bodies were already asking those questions in a much older, much more direct way, through smell and taste. Your face, and especially the area immediately around your mouth and nose, carries an enormous amount of biological information. Sweat, skin oils, the residue of what you've eaten, subtle chemical signals tied to your immune system. Modern research on human attraction has repeatedly found that people are unconsciously drawn to, or repelled by, potential partners based on genetic markers related to immune diversity, detected almost entirely through smell, without either person realizing that's what's happening. Ancient humans didn't need a laboratory to run that test. They had noses, and they had proximity. Getting close enough to smell someone, really close, face to face, breath to breath, was one of the only tools available to quietly evaluate a potential mate before committing time, resources, or reproductive risk to them. A kiss, in this theory, functioned almost like a biological background check. Am I comfortable this close to you? Does something about your scent, your breath, your skin, register as safe, healthy, compatible? Or does some ancient, preverbal part of my brain want to pull away? This is why, even today, people describe a first kiss as something that can instantly change how they feel about a partner, sometimes making the connection stronger, sometimes killing the attraction on the spot, for reasons neither person can fully explain in words. That reaction may be far older than modern dating. It may be a direct descendant of an ancient screening process your ancestors relied on before they had any other way to judge whether someone was worth staying close to. Now add a third layer, and this one is less about detection and more about attachment. When two humans kiss, even briefly, the brain releases a specific combination of chemicals. Oxytocin, often nicknamed the bonding hormone, increases, the same hormone released during childbirth and breastfeeding, the same hormone that helps a mother and infant form an intense, protective attachment to each other. Dopamine rises too, tied to pleasure and reward. Cortisol, the stress hormone, tends to drop. In a world with no writing, no verbal contracts, no formal way to declare "I trust you, I choose you, I am tying my future to yours," ancient humans needed some mechanism to physically seal that kind of bond. A kiss may have functioned as exactly that, a fast, physical, chemically reinforced signal that said, without a single word, "This alliance is real." Consider what alliances meant in a small hunter-gatherer band of 25 to 50 people. Your survival depended entirely on the people around you. Who would share food with you during a bad season? Who would help raise your children if something happened to you? Who would fight beside you, or hide you, or warn you? In that world, bonding wasn't a luxury emotion, it was a literal survival mechanism. Any behavior that could reliably strengthen a bond between two people, especially two people about to raise children together, had enormous evolutionary value. A kiss, chemically, does exactly that. It lowers stress. It increases trust. It creates a small, repeatable ritual of closeness that both people can return to again and again to reinforce the same bond. Over hundreds of generations, a behavior that reliably strengthens pair bonds, bonds that then produce more surviving offspring, is exactly the kind of behavior that spreads, even if it started as something as unglamorous as chewed food passed between a mother and her child. Here's where the story stops being simple. If kissing were purely a biological instinct, hardwired the same way in every human population, you would expect to find it everywhere, in every culture, throughout every era. You don't. Historical and anthropological records describe multiple societies where romantic or sexual kissing on the mouth was rare, absent, or actively considered strange or unhygienic before contact with outside cultures introduced it. Some groups favored other closeness rituals entirely, pressing noses together, sniffing along the cheek or neck to draw in a partner's scent directly, resting foreheads together. These weren't lesser versions of a kiss. They were entirely separate solutions to the exact same underlying problem. How do you get close enough to another person to trigger trust, comfort, and attraction, using your face as the tool? This matters because it tells you something important. The urge to seek closeness, to use scent and proximity and gentle physical contact to build intimacy, does appear to be close to universal. But the specific decision to do that with a mouth-to-mouth kiss looks more like a cultural invention, one version, among several, of a much older and more universal human need. That reframes the entire question. It's less accurate to ask why did ancient humans invent kissing, as if there were one single moment, one single tribe, one single ancestor who did it first and everyone copied. It's more accurate to ask, why did this particular version of the ritual, lips against lips, end up outcompeting the others, spreading across so many separate, disconnected cultures throughout history, until it became one of the most common gestures of intimacy on Earth. The earliest confirmed written evidence of kissing as an intimate, romantic, or sexual act comes from ancient texts far more recent than the origins we've been describing, clay tablets and early literature describing kissing between lovers, and religious or poetic texts referencing kisses as expressions of affection and desire. But writing itself is incredibly young compared to the human species. Writing has existed for a few thousand years. Humans, physically identical to you, have existed for roughly 300,000. That gap matters enormously. It means kissing almost certainly existed as a behavior, in some population, in some form, feeding-related, bonding-related, or both, for hundreds of thousands of years before anyone thought to write it down. What survives in ancient texts isn't the invention of the kiss. It's the first time someone in a literate society decided the behavior was significant enough, common enough, or emotionally loaded enough to describe. By the time kissing shows up in the earliest surviving poetry and correspondence, it's already treated as something instantly understood by the reader, not a strange new custom that needs explaining, but a familiar shorthand for longing, desire, and closeness. That tells you the behavior was already deeply embedded in the culture producing that writing, likely inherited from generations, possibly tens of thousands of years, before any of it was ever recorded. So how did one version of this ritual, the mouth-to-mouth kiss specifically, end up spreading so widely that today it's practiced, in some form, across the overwhelming majority of the modern world? Part of the answer is almost certainly the same mechanism behind the spread of any successful cultural behavior: migration, trade, conquest, and storytelling. As populations moved, merged, and came into contact with one another across thousands of years, behaviors that felt emotionally rewarding and socially useful tended to get copied. A kiss doesn't require translation. Two people from cultures with no shared language can still perform it, and both understand, instantly, what it communicates. That kind of universal legibility makes a behavior extremely good at crossing cultural boundaries where language-dependent customs cannot. Trade routes carried more than goods. They carried gestures, rituals, and customs, absorbed by contact and repetition rather than deliberate teaching. Empires that expanded across vast, diverse populations often accelerated this kind of cultural merging, taking a custom common in one region and through generations of contact, making it common across an entire territory. Later, During eras of global exploration, colonization, and mass communication, romantic kissing appears to have been carried even further, reaching populations where it had previously been rare or absent, sometimes replacing older, local rituals of closeness entirely. By the time film, television, and modern media arrived, kissing wasn't just a private ritual between two people anymore. It became a performed, broadcasted symbol, repeated in thousands of stories, until entire generations across the world grew up absorbing the same unspoken lesson before they ever kissed anyone themselves. This is what love looks like. This is the gesture that means someone chose you. Here is the strange part, the part that connects all of this directly back to you, right now, in your own life. You didn't invent your reaction to kissing. You inherited it, through biology, through culture, or almost certainly through some tangled combination of both, layered on top of each other over hundreds of thousands of years. The rush of oxytocin you feel is the same chemical mechanism your ancestors relied on to seal alliances that kept them alive. The instinct to notice, even unconsciously, how someone smells and tastes when you're that close to them is the same ancient screening process your ancestors used before words existed to ask, "Are you good for me?" And the emotional weight you place on a kiss, the way losing it, or waiting for it, or remembering it can occupy your thoughts for days, may trace back to an infant's oldest, most basic association. This closeness means I am safe. You are not overreacting when a kiss feels like it matters. Your nervous system has been rehearsing this exact response, in one form or another, for longer than any language has existed to describe it. And that's really the pattern behind almost everything we cover on this channel. A gesture that feels small, automatic, almost forgettable in the moment, a kiss at a doorway, a hand reaching for a salt shaker, a phone lighting up with a friend's name, turns out to be carrying the weight of hundreds of thousands of years behind it. You are not just a modern person doing modern things. You are an ancient body, running ancient software, dressed up in a world your ancestors would not recognize. The kiss on your lips today and the kiss shared by two people 40,000 years ago, huddled by a fire with no written language and no idea their gesture would still exist this far into the future, are not really two different things. They're the same behavior, carried forward, generation after generation, mouth to mouth, until it reached you. If you made it this far, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. We make videos like this one every week about ancient human behavior, about what your body still remembers, about the gap between the world you were built for and the one you actually live in. If that is something you want more of, hit subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm that this kind of storytelling is worth keeping alive. See you in the next one.